ontologically speaking, we're talking about atheism is a non-belief in a God who is classically defined in the way the monotheistic religions would classify God or define God.
So under that paradigm, the deist would not be a theist.
What did you say?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear. What was that?
Do you want to repeat yourself on that, Kenny?
No, I mean you.
I said
yeah.
under Kenny's classical theistic approach, a deist, even though a deist would have a God belief, would not be considered to be a theist, which is confusing to some people under classical theist approach.
What about polytheists that have more gods that are more like super aliens, like the Mormon, like Mormonism even is similar to that, really.
Right, and so in that sense,
how do you classify that? Is what my question is.
Oh, they would be polytheistic. For sure, yeah.
Okay, but not theistic is what you're saying.
Well, the term atheist was coined in response to the monotheistic belief system, the three main monotheistic religions, Judaism,
I don't know if that's true. I mean, it depends on what you mean. Atheos, the Greek word, was used even before Christianity existed and outside the context of Judaism, like the non-believers in pagan non-believers or non-believers in pagan communities were called atheos and atheoi.
Right. Well, now the accusations against early Christians were that they were atheists, homosexual, cannibals.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, actually, that's what we hear from Christians, which is interesting. When you look at the actual pagan critics, they weren't accusing them of being atheists. They were accusing them of being superstitious, which was a bigger insult to the pagan community at the time. The intellectual pagans thought less of superstitious people than they did of atheists, although they weren't fond of atheists either generally. There was a good book.
So basically, I was just saying that in modern English usage.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I shouldn't harp on this too much because I think semantics is very arbitrary in many ways. So as long as we understand what your classification system is, we can work with it. But other people have different classification systems and how they use the words is different. But yeah.
So how do you define things like the difference between a polytheist, a henotheist, or a monolaterist? How would you differentiate between those three?
You asking me or
either or?
Okay.
Sure. Let's go with you.
Oh, wait, so those terms are all self-defining, right? Monolaterist means worship only one God, even though you might believe there are other gods. Henotheist is the belief of one supreme God, even if there are other subordinate gods. And then what was the other one? I can't remember.
Polytheist.
Well, polytheist is believing there are many gods, right? So those are all like subcategories of theism, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some of them are compatible, like henotheism and they're all compatible. You could have all of those beliefs could be the same. You could be a polytheist, a henotheist, and a monolaterist at the same time.
I think I know a few of them actually.
Yeah,
it's a little bit confusing, but I think I actually do know a few.
The ancient Jews could probably be categorized as henotheists.
They're ancient.
That's true. Yeah. And some people have made that point. Some other scholars have.
Yeah, but when I speak about the great theistic religions, I'm talking about the ontologically simple, divine being who is omni great. When I run into somebody who said paganism, like Ocean, he's. To me, he's a polytheist, not a theist in my book. So,
talk about Ocean Keltoy, if people that may not be aware of who you're referring to.
Oh, have you had him on the show? Is that who you're talking about?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Actually, he's actually talked to you before too. When you were on
right,
back on Heretic Woman's channel.
Yeah. Okay.
So, Dr. Carrier, what would your why would you believe that in the non-existence of God? What's your rationalism for your atheism?
Well, of course, you know the basic four arguments from my book why I'm not a Christian. And I mean, frankly, it's a ton of things. Like everything I look at doesn't look favorable for the God hypothesis. I treat the God hypothesis as a hypothesis, and then I test it against alternative hypotheses and see which one naturally fits the evidence better. And My latest treatment of this for people to want to see like the complete list of arguments, not complete, but a large list of arguments, is my article online called Bayesian Counter-Apologetics. So just Google Bayesian counter-apologetics and you'll find I go through like the 10 standard arguments for God and explain how like actually the evidence supports the other conclusion for each one. And there are, a lot of them are standard arguments, like the silence argument, the argument from evil, and the argument from naturalism, the fact that science hasn't found supernatural powers or properties, despite the fact that it should have by now, if there were such things. Various other types of arguments like that, where the God hypothesis just does not fit the reality that I observe, especially when you see like the diversity of religions and how they change over time. Is exactly what you expect if God is something that humans are inventing in their heads, even sincerely, but nonetheless, you would expect it to diverge just like languages do. But if there was one true God, there should have been a common thread of the same religion from time immemorial across all cultures, receiving the same revelations, receiving the same gospel through all time. That would be more expected. And then if you're going to go back and try to create all these excuses for why God would make the world look exactly like it would look if he didn't exist, now you're starting to gerrymander the theory of God, and that I find is a problematic way to respond to a failure of a hypothesis. Scientists talk about this all the time, of what a bad scientific theory is a theory that you're trying to gerrymander to fit the evidence rather than admitting when you should really let go of a theory, the evidence goes against it. And so that's the general reason I'm an atheist.
Right. It's been a while since I read your book. About 3 years, and I was...
Yeah, in the book, the four arguments are, the argument from silence... Well, here, argument from silence, the wrong universe theory, like we would have a different universe if God existed. This is the universe that we would have if there wasn't one. God doesn't do anything, which is the argument from evil, and the evidence is inadequate. So a God who wanted us to be saved, who actually cared about us, would give us better evidence than has been given, for example. Those are the four arguments that I present and discuss and defend against attacks, too. So, like, I don't just make the arguments. Sure. I realize there's critics of those arguments. I include the criticisms and deal with them in that book.
But you generally you wrap it all up into a probabilistic argument of what is more likely to be the case.
Exactly. It's all probability, and it's all in terms of what is the probability of the evidence. What is the more probable evidence you would expect on each theory, and then go look at the evidence, see what it matches. Right. What should you expect to see, and which thing is what you actually see, and then you compare the evidence with the theory. So it's evidence, or it's theory testing, right? It's hypothesis testing from my perspective.
Well, you had mentioned something like the problem of evil, which I think obviously is a huge problem when it comes to things like an omnibenevolent God. But what happens if somebody doesn't posit an omnibenevolent God? I know, Kenny does believe that, but let's say that you were not speaking to Kenny on that. You're talking to somebody else who believes God exists, but he's not omnibenevolent. Can you still use some kind of gratuitous problem of evil against that type of deity?
Probably not the gratuitous evil one. Like if you were to say like a God who really doesn't give a damn about us, right? A God that's more interested in making black holes than people, and people are just fleas on his project. That you could, if you believed in a God like that, then obviously the evil stuff. If you have an indifferent God, then what you would expect from an indifferent God is exactly what we observe, a universe that seems to be indifferently governed with respect to our interests. But then there's other things. Then you have to say, well, why do you believe that God exists? And so then you look at the evidence. You look at well, what is your reason for even thinking there is such a being? And then the more minimally you define your God, the harder it is to even establish a reason to believe that God exists. And so that as the theory shrinks, so does the evidence, basically.
Mm-hmm. Now, I had mentioned I work with Reasons to Believe. Are you familiar with that organization?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, when I argue for the existence of God, I'll either bypass the beginning of the universe because I think just the nature of existence and being itself demands one who has existence in and of him or her or itself. But as far as the beginning of the universe, Einsteinian special general relativity, the way Dr. Ross argues for the beginning of the universe, therefore a God. Why would you not find that convincing?
Kind of the same way, like I don't buy flat Earth theory, right? So if I want to know how the universe and how the universe began and why it began the way it did, in particular, I want to go talk to cosmological scientists who actually have theories about this and actually adduce evidence for their theories. Now, they haven't fully sussed the whole thing, but their theories actually are better supported by evidence, and there's no God in them. Like, they don't need gods to actually explain any of this stuff. So I would wait for like an actual cosmological scientific study that confirmed that the only way that a certain thing could have happened and caused the universe had to be intelligent. We just don't have that science yet, so there's nothing to back that view. So I think that's a supposition rather than a reasoned argument, and that's the way I approach that particular one. It's an unknown. There isn't anything we can do with that.
I want to hear.
You don't think coming to? Okay.
Oh,
what?
Go ahead. Finish your thought.
Oh, it's going to run us into a long dialogue here.
I kind of wanted to go back to what we were talking about just a second ago with the benevolent deity topic, and I'm going to ask you, Kenny. Do you believe that hell is a justifiable punishment for a simple lack of belief?
The doctrine of hell has its existential struggles, like we all do, to think about hell and eternity. So let me just say this. In saying what I'm going to say, I, with no glee, no joy, but with tears in my heart, say that the doctrine of hell is biblical. The nature of sin is as such, and I do give this illustration when I share this with people. If I were to, and maybe Steve and Dr. Carey would like to do this, if I were to go and attack Donald Trump, if I were to attempt to slap him, I would be shot down dead before I even got to that point. Why? Because of the object in which I tried to assault. And I think sin has to be understood in that way, that sin is against this great being. And it's not like my neighbor. If I go slap my neighbor, we're people on equal grounds, and we might, not press charges. But even in the attempt to attack the president, I'm going to be shot. So the object of offense has a lot to do with the penalties that are incurred from that offense. I
understand what you're saying with that, but I'm talking about
medieval and aristocratic, though. It's kind of arrogance in that way. In reality, though, someone who tried to slap Donald Trump has the same human and civil rights as anyone else. In reality, they would just wrestle him to the ground if you're trying to slap him. They would use commensurate force. Well, they're not allowed to torture the guy. They're not allowed to use incommensurate force. Because we have actually standards of law of equity, like persons are equal.
And it wouldn't be an eternal punishment either.
Yeah, the whole idea
don't take my illustration to be
it's like
a perfect analogy.
It's the old French tyrannical, it's the King Louis idea that because of your social status, an offense against you deserves more punishment than the same offense against someone else. That's actually archaic medieval thinking. It's not really.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is it would probably shoot first, ask questions later if anybody with their hand in their pocket ran up to the president.
That was utilitarian, only because they have to. They're not omniscient, right? If they were omniscient and knew the hand didn't hold anything, they wouldn't. We'd be outrageous for them to shoot.
It's just a basic point. It's just a basic point to show that the object that's in view.
Not. The analogy doesn't really work because we don't actually accept the barbaric moral values that you're using as the analogy. That a superior being actually is less harmable than an innocent, right?
And it's probably more forgiving.
Let me throw this one out.
More knowledgeable, more forgiving. Yeah.
If I kill a cat or kill a human being, what penalties are going to be incurred for that? With killing the human being is going to be greater. So the object of the offense is taken into account when the penalty is. And I'm just saying that.
We're not talking about killing anybody. I'm just talking about the simple lack of disbelief.
He's just saying that if you don't believe, like John 3:16 says, if you believe in Christ and have faith in Him. I think what Kyle's saying is if you just don't have any belief like that.
Yeah, not hurting anybody, not doing anything.
Should you have eternal punishment?
You just don't believe. You just don't.
Right, that's a good way to get back to the point.
You live a good life. You live a good life. You you do right by others, you don't mess with anybody. What is the justification just for lacking a